In life, we encounter people every day, all of whom have stories to share. We rarely take the time to ask people their personal stories, many of which will touch, move, and inspire us in some way. Matt has a passion for making authentic connections and learning about people from all walks of life. He has lived a life of giving back to the community and making a difference in people's lives. Are you ready to meet fascinating people and hear some inspiring stories? The Matt Hilton Show will introduce you to a world of possibilities you never knew existed. Sit back, be present, and enjoy. Here's your host, Matt Hilton.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Hilton and you're watching The Matt Hilton Show. Today's guest is a great friend of mine. We've known each other for about 4 years. He has a beautiful singing voice. He has a passion for loving people, and he's my pastor. You don't want to miss this show. Stay tuned for a word from our sponsor.
Inspired, experienced, customer-focused. Find a mortgage that fits your needs with Maria Leach at First United Bank Mortgage, specializing in construction and closing all types of loans, including jumbo, portfolio, conventional, FHA, and VA. A tenured team, outstanding service, competitive programs. Finance your dreams with Maria Leach at First United Bank Mortgage. mleach.firstunitedteam.com, 214-316-7915. mleach at firstunitedbank.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to the Matt Hilton Show. Today's guest is a great friend of mine, and he's also my pastor. So you're going to be in for a treat today. If you'll welcome Pat Bills. Pat, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Matt. It's always a little scary to be introduced as somebody's pastor.
Right? Yeah. I didn't want to give away too much because I wanted them to stay tuned. Right? So.
That's a loaded word, man. Means
Most
different
definitely.
things to different people.
It does. So how have you been?
You know, it's been good. The weather here in Dallas, Texas, I feel like I'm in Colorado. I mean, it's cool.
Yeah.
Mountains. No, it's
Okay, so this is going to air in the fall.
it's terrible. I don't know why anybody would want to live here in June, July, and August,
But they keep moving here.
September. I know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Just hanging on till October. But no, I'm good. I've 4 kids, and they don't get any younger or cheaper. My oldest just turned 21, so hard to believe I have a 21-year-old. We have our youngest is 10, so as my wife and I say, we got 8 years till empty nest. We can do this. So not that I'm counting.
And they have 4 boys too to boot, so
or 5 according to my wife.
There we go.
Yes, exactly.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about Pat. If somebody needed to know a synopsis of Pat and like maybe your background and what brought you to where you are today, what is that?
So I tell people that I'm really more of a missionary to Texas from Tennessee. My roots are not in Texas. I don't drive around with this bumper sticker that says
You finally got here?
I finally got here.
Right.
Or that Davy Crockett, quote that, some say they'll go to Texas, but, I'll go to hell, whatever that means.
Right.
But I would say that if somebody met me, they would know very quickly that I, love people. Just, spending any time with me, I tend to be more extroverted. I love stories. I love people's names. But I'm very rooted in this kind of this rural family, system where I grew up on a farm, and my parents, met in middle school and high school, and now my dad's kind of a small town doc, and my brother has moved back there, and he's got his own practice there in town as well, and so it's just deeply, deeply rooted in, Southern family values and all the stereotypes that go with that, right?
Yeah.
So, even the stereotypical gender roles where my mom would cook and my dad would go to work, and my mom didn't work, which is quite different than the world we're growing up in now, even different from my own home. So, when people hear that I'm from Dallas, I usually try to help them understand what that means. It's not so much Dallas as far as wearing cowboy boots and, shopping at, North Park. It's certainly more of a non-traditional Dallas where, I'm from Middle Tennessee, and there's a big difference there. So
what got you into ministry?
What got me into ministry? I would say the number one thing that got me into ministry was my own church experience. I had such a good, positive church experience, with all the news coming out from the, different traditions and denominations and all the terrible heartache and, you know, abuse and things like that. Yeah, I was exempt from pretty much all of that. It was a small town kind of church environment, had a very positive experience in the church, although it was very, from an outsider's perspective, it was very fundamentalist, it was very conservative, but it was also very, very loving, extremely nurturing. So I knew, back in the early 90s that I wanted to work with people. I did my career paper as a freshman in high school on being a coach and a teacher. So, I think what got me into ministry was my love of people, but it was deeply tied to my own experience of the church and just really wanted to be helpful in, bringing a more positive experience to the church. And I felt like I could be a part of that. And, I'm the firstborn of five. So in a lot of ways, I am a natural leader, which means I come with a great amount of humility in that. So, but no, hopefully, in all seriousness, I've learned a few things along the way as far as humility goes. But as far as what got me into ministry, obviously the Lord's hold on my life and deeply rooted in calling, which is why I'm here in Texas and not closer to family in Tennessee or my wife's family in St. Louis.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So I'm going to dive a little deep with you today because,
Sure.
You've mentioned love of people. You've mentioned conservative.
Yes.
We're both part of the Church of Christ, right? So,
Try the truth.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because sometimes conservative in church and in churches of Christ and love of all people don't actually mesh.
Yes.
So was there an event that took place within your life that broke you away from that traditional conservative thinking, or
Yeah.
what was that? What did that
Well,
look
that's a
like?
good question. So, right now I would be, a preacher, senior minister, lead minister, the guy, I explain it at our church, the one that talks the most on Sunday morning. That's what I do. But I began this journey as a youth pastor. So,
Okay.
Working with students for more than 10 years, I think what I began to discover is that there was such a attractive vulnerability that students had that I began to appreciate. But then the questions they kept asking really invited me to ask deeper questions about, my own faith, wrestle with my own doubts. And so as far as one specific event kind of breaking me away from this, fundamentalist, extremely conservative, I wouldn't say there was one thing, but I do think that the more education I got, like graduate level classes, writers and authors I was introduced to, really began to open my eyes to there being a broader world out there. And it's not just a broader world, it was deeper, more intentional questions that I was never, I thought I was never given permission to ask. Like,
Give us an example.
Okay, so in a traditional fundamentalist church, a question might be, who is welcome here at the church? And some conservative traditions might say, well, you have to behave in a certain way, or you have to believe certain things. And really the questions the students were asking, and really questions that I was asking myself is, what role does belonging place in relation to, belief and in relation to, something else? So rather than you have to believe this in order to belong to this particular church, what would it look like if we actually approach church in terms of belonging first in order to believe? And then when you think about belief, you think about, what is it that you have to believe? Because the way you and I grew up, I mean, you believe in a certain pattern, a certain way that the Bible taught you to do things, everything from, how to dress, who to marry, how to live out your own identity. And as long as you believed those things in the correct way, then you could belong to a church. And then, of course, if you contradicted one of those beliefs, then somehow you didn't belong anymore. which led to a lot of arrogance, right?
Mhm.
This arrogance of, well, the way I believe is more right or more correct than the way other people believe. So that's a really long way of answering your question. So I think it was just the raw vulnerability of those students that led me to really ask some of the questions that I was wrestling with. And, I can't detach that from, the relationship I had with my wife, and just, she grew up as a preacher's kid, and a very rare preacher's kid that wasn't, scorned by the church. She had another positive experience as well,
Mhm.
deeply connected to family. But both of our families, though we grew up in similar traditions, were fairly open theologically. I mean, my wife's dad, my father-in-law, would definitely be considered more on the progressive end, especially back in the 80s and the 90s, as far as pushing the envelope on, communion. And what if communion was more like a meal rather than something you have to do correctly.
Mm.
And even my parents were kind of the local heretics there at our local church. So
Mhm.
it's so I'm not sure there was one event in particular. It's really more people that I encountered.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, and I appreciate I was hoping that at some point in this conversation, the whole belonging first
sure,
before belief would come out, because
yeah.
I remember in a Bible class that I believe it was you that was leading it, actually wrote that up on
Mm,
the whiteboard. And that's the first time that I had, and this is like in the last year or so,
mm,
that I had seen that
yeah.
presented in such a way. And I believe you said something about that's how AA or some other entity helps people come and feel like they do belong,
Sure. Yeah,
right?
yeah. And well, hopefully what I was doing, although I can't remember that class in particular, what I hope I was doing is trying to look at the story of Jesus, of course,
Yeah,
because
you were.
it's really the story of Jesus that I feel like the church should be wrapping their arms around and attuning themselves to, rather than the story of, a particular church in the Bible, or even Paul. Not that Paul's unimportant, but Paul took his cues from Jesus,
Mm,
not the other way around. So, when Jesus would approach somebody, I find very little in scripture where Jesus led with, well, you've got to believe this in order to follow me. It was
right.
really more of an invitation to belong, beginning with the earliest disciples,
Mhm.
beginning with people that were caught in, whatever quote unquote sin. Um, and he was particularly hard on those Pharisees, those legalists that said, well, they can't belong.
Yeah.
They're untouchable, or they're unclean, or whatever. So yeah, I think other groups like AA, and the the people that we would characterize as being most like Christ, like a Mother Teresa, which
Mhm.
nobody ever talked about the fact that she was Catholic, and the Catholics certainly don't believe the right way. But yeah, it's this instinct that I would call to say, this is a human being that deserves to be treated as a person rather than a problem. So what would it look like if we really created this sense of belonging, sense of community?
Yeah.
Because there's so many people, Matt, as you well know, that don't experience that belonging that a church, I think, should be about providing.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
And if they don't feel like they belong, they wear a mask like I did for years
Mm.
and pretend to assimilate with the people that are within the congregation.
Yeah, and of course, I think everybody wears a mask to some extent. I think if we were all just completely our vulnerable selves,
What would that look like?
that'd be pretty scary, actually. Walking around with all our "Hello, my name is"
Right?
stickers. "Hello, my name is just watched porn last night. How
Mhm.
are you?"
Mhm. Yeah.
That's probably a bad example, but anyway, yeah, we all wear these masks to some extent, but yeah, I would like to think that a community, especially a community that calls themselves followers of Christ, would be able to take off those masks, because there's a belief that whoever I really am is okay.
Yeah.
Because it's okay with God, shouldn't it be okay with God's people?
Mm.
And that's really hard, because there's so much fear that goes along with being your true self, revealing your true self to someone else,
Right.
um, that yeah, can keep you from taking that mask off.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. So, want to ask you about this last Sunday.
Okay.
You talked about a deep feeling in your gut that
Yeah.
moves you to do something,
Yeah.
I believe is the gist of what it was. And it was a Greek word called, and I'm going to mess this up, splagnizomai,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. So in the gospel stories, there's an author. She's one of my favorite preachers. She's from the Presbyterian tradition. Her name is Anna Carter Florence. And Anna Carter Florence says that typically when people read the Bible, they pay attention to the nouns. And she invites preachers, especially, to think about what would it look like if you read the Bible through the verbs. Pay attention to what people are doing, especially to what Jesus is doing. So we were studying, we're in the middle of the Gospel of Mark. We were looking at the feeding of the 5,000, which of course is this great miracle story that's included in all the Gospels. But there's this great image that Mark paints for us that the other Gospel writers don't necessarily, when he says that, Jesus came, to the shore and he saw this great crowd of people and he had compassion for them. They were like sheep without a shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
So really that's the setup for the feeding of the 5,000. So it's really not so much the miracle, but rather the motivation for the miracle. So it wasn't just this, hey, I'm going to show you my power. And it really wasn't about, healing somebody who was sick, but it was rather this deep sense of compassion for the people that he saw. So one of the things that anybody can do, you don't have to have an education to do this. You can go to your interlinear, Bible Hub, online, whatever, and say, I wonder what that word or that verb in this case really means. And that word compassion, can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But if you really start digging down and looking at the original language, it's really helpful. And you start looking at the way that particular word is used in other cases. And one of the fascinating things about this word that Jesus had compassion, this splagnizomai, is that it's the same word that Jesus used in telling about the Good Samaritan. When the Good Samaritan saw someone in the ditch, he had pity on them. But it wasn't just pity, it was splagnizomai, right? And it's the same word in the story of the prodigal son. Everybody loves the story about the prodigal son that comes home with that image of the father seeing the son. And there's this moment in the story that Jesus says the father had compassion for him and ran to meet him. So it's not just feeling sorry for someone, but it's actually looking at somebody and feeling in your gut this need to do something to move towards someone in a ditch or to move towards your hurting child coming back home. And of course, Jesus in this story moving towards hungry people. And of course, the invitation was, if Jesus can move towards those people, Jesus is going to move towards you.
Right.
And then, of course, as Jesus's people, who do you need to move towards?
Right.
Which is difficult when you see somebody holding a sign at every intersection you stop at here in Dallas. Mm-hmm. Are you just going to have pity, or are you going to have splagnizomai? You actually move towards them, which could be as simple as giving them money or asking them their name. What do they really need? If I can take a little tangent here, I am really passionate about learning people's names. I love it. It's a simple practice, and people, even my own children tease me about, why are you always asking people's? Well, because names matter. I mean, I met a guy last night at a restaurant named Mason. He spelled his name Maceon. Actually, went at a restaurant. It was at AMC 30. We went to see Thor, Love and Thunder, right? Okay. And so we're at the counter, and I said, how do you say your name? And he goes, Mason. And I said, I bet you get Maceon a lot. And he goes, yeah, I get it a lot. He goes, I don't know why my parents picked this name. And we had a great conversation about who he was. And wouldn't you know it, he gave us extra popcorn. He was super nice to us. And not that I would expect that, but it just made me wonder, first of all, I wonder how many people actually get asked about their name. And secondly, how would people respond differently if you actually treated them as a person rather than a product to be used or a problem to be solved, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what I think Jesus means. Not that I'm trying to use myself as this awesome example, because I probably don't do that nearly as much as I should, but it's just fascinating that, as you said a moment ago, people have such a need to belong. And I think one of those ways could be as simple as learning their name.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. So you answered the question that I was going to ask next. And it's one that I think I'm going to start incorporating into these interviews. It's asking people, what is their splagnitzomai? So
Yeah.
I think that would be a very interesting thing to learn about people. So outside of learning people's names, what is your deep passion? What drives Pat towards something?
Wow. Boy, that's you would typically think that a pastor ought to answer with some, religiously cloaked, answer. But I think if I backed off kind of the church and Christian lingo, I would say that what drives me is the need for people to be loved. And I think that's different for different people. And for me, it begins with trying my best to see another person as a human being and trying to ask myself, what is it that person needs? That is so hard when people drive you nuts, especially, when they're driving, when they cut you off, as guys, when there's 3 stalls and somebody takes the middle one and you're like, what is wrong with you, man? That's not the rule. And so, you try to think to yourself, I wonder what's going on in that person's life, which goes hand in hand with what I do, right? I mean, I'm not called to lead a church as much as I'm called to love a specific group of people, which sometimes means saying hard things. Other times it means walking with people in some really dark moments. Sometimes it means, just listening rather than offering advice. Sometimes it means, showing up in the middle of the day to record a podcast, I mean, all kinds of things, just trying to understand people. And I guess that's what drives me. And people meaning the people in my home. I mean, I feel a deep responsibility to my family, take care of my children. Posterity is important to me, and it's not so much posterity from a financial perspective as much as it is, I want our boys to cultivate this deep love of people as well, not just because it's the right thing to do, because that's what I think being a Jesus follower is connecting with people. So
Sure.
It's a really long answer.
No. I appreciate that. It was
Sure.
a long. I say no. It was a long answer.
Thank you for your honesty. Yes.
So talking about your family and your home, your beautiful wife.
Yes.
How did y'all meet? And I mean, Deborah is someone that's very special to me. So, how did you meet? And what is one quality of her that you just?
Oh man. So we went to a small conservative Christian university in Arkansas called Harding, and I was the first generation Harding student out of my family. Deborah was fourth generation Harding student out of her. So she grew up kind of knowing that she would go to Harding, even though she kind of rebelled her senior year and wanted to go somewhere else, but ended up going anyway. I kind of went because they had an overseas program that I wanted to be a part of, and I was like, well, if I can go to Greece for a semester, I'm going to go to that school. And if I can go there to learn about ministry, I mean, what a great deal. So I get there on campus, and Matt, I was the most arrogant high school senior. I thought I was the be all end all when I arrived on campus. And I can remember trying out for the university chorus, right? Because I'd always been in chorus. I've been in show choirs in high school. And I saw it posted on a bulletin board. And I'm like, yeah, I'll try out for that. I'll probably make it. Deborah was like, looking back on that was her lifelong dream to be in chorus, because get this, her grandparents met and married in chorus. Her parents met and married in chorus. She knew she was going to meet someone and marry them in chorus. Me, it was just something else to do. So I can remember the first day in chorus, our teacher, Professor Dr. Gaines, Dr. G, that we called him, told us that for us to look around and somebody in this room might be somebody we would marry. And Deborah would tell you that she remembers looking around going, oh yeah, definitely somebody in this room. But me, I remember this, I looked around like, nope. In my arrogance, nobody good enough for me in here. There are other fish in the sea. I mean, isn't that awful? I mean, it's so bad. It's just terrible. So anyway, so I actually sat close to Deborah in chapel. And of course, she's, as you know, she's got a nice, bubbly, personality. And of course, she was attractive, but, I dated a few other girls, but we were always good friends. But Deborah would tell you she couldn't stand me. She really didn't like me at first, which...
Because of your arrogance?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't like me either, looking back on it. I look at my own kids. I'm like, God, please help them not to become like me. But anyway, it was our freshman year, and we were going on a chorus tour over Christmas. And I can remember, Matt, this is crazy. I can remember what she was wearing. And I remember, looking at her in the hallway before we got on the bus. And I remember thinking, man, I think that I'd love to kind of date her. Mm-hmm. And what's crazy is I had asked her out to coffee a few weeks before, honestly, because I was so ready to get out of the dorm room. Mm-hmm. I was not looking for any romantic interest, nothing. I just wanted to go have coffee with somebody because I was tired of studying.
She took it as a date, didn't she?
Oh, so do I have time to tell a story? It's a great story. So I call her up and say, hey, do you want to go get coffee with me? And she goes, well, what time? And like, I don't know, how about 9 o'clock? She's like, well, that's fine. And so I go and pick her up at 9 o'clock. She comes out. We go to this coffee shop. We have a great time. I didn't think anything of it. But over Christmas break, I began mulling over this like, maybe this could work out. What I didn't know is that right before I picked Deborah up to have coffee, she had another date right before that with the guy that she really liked in chorus.
In chorus. Mm-hmm.
She was actually on campus watching a movie with this guy. And she ran back after the movie was over, ran a comb through her hair, brushed her teeth, whatever, came out and met me. I didn't know anything about this. So we go and have coffee. And so I'm unaware of any of this. We go into the coffee shop and we sit down. Guess who is at the same table I choose to sit by? The guy she had just gone out with. She is mortified. And I have no idea any of this is going on. Yeah. So I'm sitting down, chatting up, because we were good friends. I'm chatting it up with people, and Deborah's just sinking lows. And then one of our friends looks over at us and goes, Pat, Deborah, Randall, Deborah, Pat. And I was like, what is your deal, man? Didn't even know about this until several weeks later. So anyway, so I come back. So I love to tell people, yes, my wife loved to go out with two different people in the same night. That's not one of the qualities I admire most about her. But anyway, so Deborah would say that on that chorus trip, there was a guy sitting next to her that was this real, kind of annoying type person. And he got up, moved up, and I came up and asked if I could sit by her on the bus. And Deborah would say, I've never left that seat since. That was freshman year. Mm-hmm. Good night, Matt. I was 18, and 2 years later we were engaged. Got married just shy of being 21, and here we are 24 years later. I think when I think about the qualities of my wife, it would be something I referred to on Sunday. Deborah has this unique ability to see the best in everybody, and she is a truth teller. She always strives to be just an authentically good person. In fact, that there are so few people in this world that I can trust to do the right thing. Deborah would be at the very top for me. Mm-hmm. Never in doubt. Deborah is always doing the right thing. Right. And so, those would be the qualities. And she's a hard worker. Homemade food. Mm-hmm. Even though now she's kind of let me dip into the kitchen. But yeah, she's great. I'm such a better person because of her. Yeah. So
she's definitely your better half.
She, no doubt, in many ways.
In my opinion.
Your opinion matters.
So as we're looking at, you're talking about family, and I'm a dad of 4 as well. Yeah. And we try to impart upon our children life lessons and things of that nature. So, uh, as you reflect back on what you've learned over the years, is there anything that you would go back and like tell your younger self, like, "Hey, dude, this is
That's
something you should know"?
It's a great question. I'm laughing because I love to ask other people that question, especially older people. In fact, at breakfast this morning, I just asked an older pastor, if you go back and talk to yourself when you were in your 40s, what would you say? And I think for me, I would I would probably tell myself that the more work you can do on yourself at the earliest age, the better off you will be as you get older.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard. I mean, when you do that core identity work and you start unpacking, the relational dynamics that you dealt with, as a kid and with your own mom and your own dad,
Yeah.
when you start to unravel that, it's painful, but it helps you become more self-aware. And I wish I had known the power of becoming self-aware a lot sooner, because I think that would have prevented a lot of pain in my relationships. It would have prevented a lot of pain, obviously, in my marriage, just because, every relationship you have before you get married has an impact on that marriage. And whether that marriage lasts or whether it doesn't last, you are kind of in training to be in a relationship with somebody. So I wish I could go back and kind of tell my younger self to pay attention more to, my own story and my own self. And a lot of that's because, as guys, you know, your brain isn't fully developed in your mid-20s anyway,
Sure.
right? I'm not even sure I would have the capacity for that. But I think I would have certainly done some more work on myself at an earlier age. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, not to, pull out scriptures and out of context or anything, but there is a scripture that says, love your neighbor as thyself, right?
Yes.
And so to me, that means you have to love yourself before. You have to, like, how you love yourself is how you love others, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I think that for me, I would be careful in talking about that language of before, as far as there's the sequence. I do think that it's certainly possible to love other people without fully loving yourself, but I do think that Jesus was certainly illuminating the truth that there is an understanding of yourself that will allow you to love someone else in deeper, more intentional ways. I don't think you can love someone fully in their brokenness without fully understanding your own brokenness.
Right.
And it's not that you can't love somebody, but
Sure.
I think the more you understand yourself and the more grace you experience, the more grace you're going to extend.
Yeah.
At least I mean, look at Paul, right? I mean, Paul didn't realize his full self until, he was blinded on that road to Damascus. Scales fell from his eyes. Those scales, I'd like to think that spiritually speaking, it was more than just, physical scales. There was some, spiritual awareness that he had gotten so many things wrong about himself that really allowed him to open himself up to others, Gentiles. And he was allowed to be used more fully by God because he was now more of aware of who he was in this journey. So yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah. Talking about, I've been involved with Highland Oaks now for, I think it's going on 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a while. Huh?
Yeah.
And I can still vividly remember the first Sunday I was there.
Sure you can.
So we've sold our building.
Yes.
We're moving into another building. I've been
Yes.
part of that transition team, and we were just talking about that before the show today. So, tell us a little bit about the vision of Highland Oaks. Like I know we've been part of that conversation and all, but
Sure.
you have a good sense, I believe, as a lead minister there. That,
I would hope so.
from conversations you've had with people, like what is the vision for our congregation as we move into this new space?
Yeah. So I think if you really take a step back and, what I call kind of a 30,000-foot view, churches are hurting right now. They were in trouble a few years ago, and then COVID hit, and then COVID, as it appropriately so, forced people into this, isolation. I say appropriately so. I mean, it was a pandemic,
Mhm.
and or as many people in our church, the pandemic.
Right.
It was hard. It was awful. I mean, people retreated into their homes, and all of a sudden, people began to, look at their own lives and think to themselves, "Man, what does this look like to live in community with other people?"
Mhm.
And through that, churches really suffered, numerically. But one of the things I'm so grateful for about Highland Oaks is that even though we experienced a lot of the same things other churches did, we were still resolute on our vision, which is, to me, very clear. I mean, it's a vision for, discipleship. We're going to be a place for loving, growing, and sending disciples. And I know that's a pretty broad net, no pun intended, as far as
Mhm.
discipleship, Jesus casting the
Right.
net. But I do think our vision for discipleship has helped sharpen our focus as we've transitioned away. So, for example, when we are selling our building, we were not in this financial crisis. We were not in a situation where we had these unimaginable payments that we couldn't possibly make, so we had to sell. It's not the story at all. In fact, we had even decided to stay at our current location because we'd had all these wonderful community partnerships. We were known as the church with all the Amazon trucks. Well,
Mhm.
that's because we wanted to kind of partner with Amazon and help lease our parking lot space to Amazon because they serviced our local neighborhood. I mean, that's a part of loving our community well.
Right.
We have so many people that use our space because we had a huge campus, right? And so we had 5 or 6 different faith communities using our building to have their worship services over the course of a weekend. Why? Well, because that's how we love people well. That's how we grow our own self.
Mhm.
So I think our vision has really helped bring shape and meaning to what a building actually can mean to its church. So as we began looking for a different church expression, and of course selling our building, eliminated our debt, which was a very practical thing. But I mean, that's huge. When I arrived here 13 years ago, Matt, we were in debt $7 million. That's a lot of zeros.
Mhm.
$7 million. So as we began chipping away at that, we had, a little over 2 million still left. We're on track to pay it off by like 2035. And then this opportunity came along and said, what would it look like if you could pay that off now?
Mm.
Well, I mean, you're in real estate. I mean, it doesn't take a highly educated, smart person. If somebody comes along and offers you money for your home that allows you to eliminate debt and have money left over to buy something else
Mhm.
without any debt,
Right.
why wouldn't you at least consider it? So as we began considering it, the more that seemed to make sense with our vision of loving, growing, and sending disciples. And so, as you well know, our vision for loving and growing and sending disciples in our community led us to explore spaces in our community. And community we live in, the Lake Highlands area, land is not that easy to come
Mhm.
by. It's an expensive place to build,
Right.
expensive place to live. But part of the tension of Lake Highlands is that there is a very strong divide between the rich and the poor. There's lots of apartment complexes and lower income housing and people groups, not just people. I mean, we've got
Mhm.
so many different ethnic uh, groups that are there in our community, and so the more we began to explore other options, an option became available that's 1,500 feet from our current location that allows us to maintain all of our community partnerships, but also allows us to renovate a space that can exist for the sake of the community rather than exist for the purpose of a church meeting there.
Mm.
I mean, it changes everything, right? I mean, it's a game changer when you have a space that you can reimagine for the sake of the community rather than the sake of a particular assembly that meets there a few times during the week.
Yeah.
So I think our vision for our new space is what would it look like to not have a sloped floor in the worship center, but to have a level floor so that we can host community events.
Mhm.
What would it look like to have a big space where, we can have community and town hall meetings? And I think that churches talk about doing that, but we've actually done that in our current space. And so what that's done is it's given us even more fuel for an imagination for being kind of this parish, or what I would call a first century synagogue, that kind of functioned as more of a civic center than it does just this place where people can come and check off a box and be sure that they're doing the right thing week in and week out.
Yeah.
So once again, long answer to a question. Don't ever ask a preacher to answer a question.
No,
You're
it's
going to
all
get a
good.
really long answer.
No, it's all good. And I'm excited about that opportunity of the community being able to use the space for different things. And because you're right. I mean, if most churches just have it for, their assemblies and their Bible classes, and then it's locked up for the rest of the week. So
yeah. And what's crazy is that when we start thinking about even office space, right? We start thinking about, what if office space became shared space? And it's not that every minister had a designated office, or even different ministries. What if, the preschool or the child development center actually shared space with our children's ministry? And so it wasn't just any one group's space, but it was the people's space. That could really be hopefully an endearing vision that matched up with what I think the mission of Scripture really is, which is to embody the presence of Christ, the presence of God in a particular location and place. So,
as we wrap up here, can you believe it's already been 40 minutes?
No. Has it really?
It has.
40 minutes?
It has.
That's like twice as long as I preach on Sunday.
Right?
You didn't even fall asleep.
I did.
Well done, man.
I drank a whole cup of coffee.
That's right, buddy.
No, but what I do at the end of these shows is I ask my guest about what they dream about. And because I have a nonprofit called Who Do You Know? And we focus on inspiring people to imagine and to dream again. People have stopped doing that for the most part. And we focus on 3 pillars. And that is a person you want to meet, a place you want to go, or an experience you want to have. And so I asked my guests, because we have viewers who may be able to make some of those dreams come true for you. So,
wow, way cool.
Yeah. So a place you want to go, we'll start there. Where's a place that Pat would love to go one day?
That's a really difficult question for me to answer, because I've been to a lot of places. Literally, I've been all over the world just with visiting, missionary partners or whatever. But there's 2 places that I've always wanted to go that I never have. One is Hawaii, believe it or not. Never been to Hawaii. My wife has.
None of the islands at all?
None.
Okay.
Never been. Would love to go, because all I hear is people telling me, "Babe, you need to go to Hawaii." The other place I would love to go that my wife has been is Australia and New Zealand. Okay. Would love to go to Australia and New Zealand. Sure. Just because, to experience that culture, and, I love to travel. So yeah, those would be the 2 places that I'd want to go. Definitely.
Okay. A person you would want to meet that is alive. Like, it's not one of those questions like, oh, who would you like to have been? Like, it's who's alive that you'd like to meet.
Such a hard question to answer. Can I pick 2, or do I have to just pick one?
No. Throw them out there.
I would love to meet, Steven Spielberg.
Okay.
Just because I love creative people. Yeah. And to be able to have a meal with him and just be able to, figure out what kind of creative juices roll with him. The other person I'd love to meet would be Michelle Obama. Just have such a deep respect for her and how she has, carried herself as a Black woman, as the first, Black first lady, and reading her, biography and watching what she does, how she handles herself. Those 2 people. Only third to Billy Joel. So
we'll stop there.
My childhood hero,
right?
Billy Joel. Billy, if you're listening, I'm coming to see you at Madison Square Garden. So
there you go. You are?
Actually, you asked me what's something I've always wanted to do. I'm actually flying out to New York tomorrow morning. I'm actually going to go see a mentor of mine up in Vermont, believe it or not. So I flew into New York. I told Deborah, I'm just going by myself. I was like, Okay, I've got a bucket list item. I've always wanted to go see Billy Joel at Madison Square Garden because he plays Madison Square Garden like 5 or 6 times a year. I went to see him twice. Once when I was in high school, he and Elton John face-to-face tour.
Oh, wow.
3 hours. Amazing. And then I went to see him again in Atlanta. So anyway, I got online. Tickets are like several hundred. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I'm like, see this old guy, saying,
Right.
but it's just fantastic. So I found a seat that's actually behind the stage. And I got on, online, and they said, best kept secret at Madison Square Garden are the seats behind the stage. So believe it or not, I'm like on row 6, 1 ticket tomorrow night, Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
So I'm going by myself. I cannot wait. I'm going to be singing Uptown Girl and everything at the top of my lungs. Oh, it's going to be so much fun.
Talking about singing, y'all need to visit Highland Oaks because every now and then Pat will sing at the beginning of the sermon,
Yes.
or he and his wife and a couple of others may do a quartet or a duet. Like it's amazing. So
thanks, man.
you do have a beautiful voice.
You're very kind.
Oh,
Thanks.
well, tell the truth.
Did I answer all 3?
No,
of them?
experience. What experience do you want to have that you haven't had? And meaning like jumping out of a plane or no.
Definitely. No. Definitely jumping out of a plane. If anybody is listening and they need somebody to go with them to skydive, I would love to skydive.
And you've never done that before?
No. In fact, one of our shepherds at church, Bob Palmer, who is in his 80s, goes skydiving every year for his birthday. Did you know that?
And why haven't you been with him? No, I didn't know that.
Isn't that amazing? And several on our staff decided to go skydiving. I was like, where? It's like, it's because you've probably talked to my wife, But I am worth more dead than I am alive, according to my insurance policy. But I would love. That's something a lot of people don't know about me. I'm kind of a king of extreme. I mean, I'll do. I'm not scared of heights. I mean, I love like the sky coaster over the Royal Gorge. I've done that.
Oh yeah,
twice. So much fun. Convinced my son to do it with me.
Which one?
The sky coaster on the Royal Gorge.
No, which son?
Joshua, of course,
Joshua,
my
okay.
oldest. Are you kidding me? Caleb would have probably done it too. My 18-year-old, but an experience, definitely skydiving, absolutely skydiving.
Okay.
So,
and when I use that as an example, I had no clue that was your experience.
Are you kidding me? So your job, Matt, is to convince my wife to let me go skydiving.
If anyone can do it, I probably can.
That's right, buddy. That's right.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, my friend. I appreciate it very
You're
much.
so welcome.
And you are love, and I love you, and thank you for
Thank you, man.
being you.
Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. That wraps it up. Thank you for tuning in today, and tune in next week as we have another guest that's a fascinating person, possibly with an inspiring story.
The Matt Hilton Show would like to thank our sponsors, Hilton Realty Advisors and Maria Leach with the First United Mortgage Group. The Matt Hilton Show would also like to thank our partners, the Who Do You Know organization. You can find out more at wdyk.org. If you'd like to contact Matt or know a fascinating person with an inspiring story that would make a great guest, reach out to the show at themattHiltonshow@gmail.com.